I'm Bob the Hollow. In this video, I thought I'd take some time to showcase a few of the comments that I've got throughout the videos, and I'll also take some time to talk about my process of lore hunting. I'd like to thank everybody who has shown enough interest in my videos to leave questions about them. Thank you very much for the many compliments. Thank you for the constructive criticism. I think it's important for my growth, and as for the more hateful comments, thank you as well. So, I think this was my first comment ever. Fake and gay. Well, moving on. This one talks about something that, for what I've seen, has the community somewhat divided. The identity of the first of the scholars from the Grand Archives. I think most people go with either Sullivan, Audia, or non-specified. Secundum adheres to the school of thought that Audia would have been this first of the scholars, saying that Soulstream is Soul Geyser in the Japanese version. And yes, they share a name, but nothing else. They not only look different, but they also have different statuses and requirements. Soul Geyser requires 64 intelligence, while Soulstream requires only 45. They are indeed two different spells. I have presented many arguments that place Sullivan within Lothric, and thus far, I've seen none that would do the same for Audia. The Soul Geyser connection is very flimsy, as I have pointed out, and it was actually addressed on the video, so if you have any other arguments defending Audia as a contender, I'm all ears, but until then, I'm sticking with Sullivan. And since we're talking about the Pontiff, Malfuri asks, maybe I need to do some more reading, but the whole thing with Irithyll and Anorlondo is confusing as far as location. Are they like two places that are smashed together? I see Irithyll as lower Anorlondo. I think it was already there in Dark Souls 1, we just couldn't get to it. On my video about Pharaon and the Abyss Watchers, no, this is Patrick, decided to present me with his own theory regarding the Undead Legion's fighting style. When the Abyss Watchers or Pharaon discovered Artorias' grave, they, of course, would find his sword but not his shield, because his shield was lost in the chasm of the Abyss. What would they find along his sword? 2 daggers, 1 gold and 1 silver. I think Cyrano's weapons might have been assumed to be Artorias' weapons, and they copied his fighting style of using a great sword and a dagger. The dagger itself changed over time to be more hook-like, because that makes it easier to swing oneself around in the way they do. I don't see any way to actually confirm this, but it is a really interesting possibility. One problem that I noticed was that there were a lot of weapons around Artorias' grave, but Patrick was quick to reply that, yes, there were a lot of other weapons surrounding his grave, but the Abyss Watchers don't fight with any other types of weapons, aside from a great sword paired with a dagger, and I like to think that Miyazaki wouldn't haphazardly give people trying to emulate Artorias' gear that Artorias did not use, unless there was some other meaning to it. So, yeah, I'm very much inclined to believe this. It makes complete sense. We found Cyrano's ring behind Artorias' grave in Dark Souls 1, so she was definitely there. And considering that they used the dagger to hunt in the same manner as wolves, then it's 100% feasible that they would have misinterpreted the faded legend of the Abyss Walker. Patrick and I agree that it cannot be confirmed, but it does make sense. Thanks for sharing this with me. Still on the topic of Sierran, video poster linked her to the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, drawing upon the similarities between their weapons and fighting styles. I think this theory gained some traction prior to the game's release, when some concept art of the dancer made its way into the internet. The problem is that the dancer's blades were given to her by Sullivan and are meant to symbolize her vows to him by mirroring his own swords. Also, the Lord's blades were a whole group, not just Sierran, and they all fought using the same style. Video poster agreed with these arguments, but yes, I do agree that she was meant to be reminiscent of Sierran, and I must say, I was not disappointed. On the topic of demons, Juliet Moss pointed out that I should never forget the Capra demon or Taurus demon in Dark Souls 1. I tried to make that video about demons in general, rather than focusing on specific demons, but maybe I could have mentioned them, yes. They didn't get a spot on the video because I believe their participation in the story of Dark Souls is somewhat different from what I was exploring. One of which isn't really an invading army, and we both agreed that they were most likely hunting humanities for the Fair Lady. If I ever find an excuse to talk about her, I'll feature these two as well, I promise. No, Jesus Patrick returns again with another theory, this time about Batwing demons or imps. He theorizes that they aren't chaos demons and offers two possibilities. They were crossbreed experiments from Sith, or they were naturally conceived by humans and demons, like when a demon mom and a human dad love each other very much, kind of naturally conceived. Anyway, the problem is that it was already clearly stated by the game that they are, in fact, chaos demons, as seen in the description for their spears in Dark Souls 1, and Patrick was well aware of that. He touches on the fact that they seem unaffected by the dwindling of the chaos flame, but their share of the flame might be dying as well. We just don't know when it's going to go out completely. Also, we know demons can survive without the chaos flame, like the stray demon in Lothric. Maybe their flame has already died out, maybe that's why they seem weaker than the rest of their kin, or maybe they were always physically weak and lack of actual strength due to lack of flame wouldn't be such a huge factor for them. On the same video where I talk about demons, I also talked about Kartos, and Wildcard 182 had this to say on the matter. I believe that Kartos is based on the kingdom of Persia, and Wonir being a Xerxes-like figure that ties to saying the homelands, curved swords, hostile to the holy empires and armor designs, to name a few nods. For more reference to my headcanon, Lothric would be Byzantine and Anorlondo would be Rome, with Dark Souls 3 taking place after the split into the Holy Roman Byzantine empires. I'm not sure, but would venture a guess that the demons are Carthage, since we've been fighting them since Dark Souls 1, before the fall of the Roman Empire, but their empire is long shattered by Dark Souls 3. Well, very good to you, my friend. It was very concise and I really don't have anything to add here. To be honest, I just think it was a very interesting comparison and I wanted to share it with the rest of you guys. A few people have commented on the Bloodborne Dark Souls connection. Handhome and Aromardu bring up Aldrich and his vision of a deep sea. I'm still trying to put my thoughts in order regarding the dark, the abyss and the deep, but nonetheless, I completely agree with anyone and everyone claiming the IPs are connected. It will probably never be confirmed due to legal reasons, but I think they were very straightforward with their references. Aromardu also brings up Chester, and since I like Chester is from our future, right? So he may have found the broken pendant as well, and Menace snatched him like he did to us. And come on, he's a blueprint for the hunters. Karin was famous for its undead hunts, after all. Foxdie and Cabo Piarimo discussed the possibility of Ludleth being a pygmy lord due to his resemblance to them. At the time, I simply posted a close-up comparison to demonstrate that they don't really look alike at all, but by the time I got around to making this video, it had also come to my attention that there was an actual theory about it running around. I've checked it out and I still don't buy it. It premises around the fact that he refers to himself as Kobito, Shonin or Shojin in Japanese, and while they do use this word to reference the actual pygmy, this word is a lot more broad in meaning and a lot more common than the word pygmy is in English. If it had been pygmy for both instances, that would have been a lot more likely. So, unless you have more substantial evidence, I'm just not convinced. Lazarus 2376 would love to see me shoehorn Dark Souls 2 into the lore. Possible sexual connotations aside, people have been making a few questions about Dark Souls 2 and I'm considering making a video or two about it. The only two things to notice would be, first, I would probably treat it as a spin-off. kind of, which I think may have been how they saw it back then. And second, there would be no point in rehashing old arguments and theories if I can't add anything new to the conversation. So, yeah, we'll see. B. Lung and Eric Reed comment that Midir probably couldn't be the Abyss Dragon because he wouldn't leave Filianor in the Ringed City. But Shiro explains that when she says Midir is his name and the Archdragons are his forebears. He once railed against the dark, but was by the dark afflicted. Now here, returned, he remaineth. So he went away, fought the dark, kicked some Millwood ass, and now he's back. Video poster again saying, I don't think the Hate Maiden is the hag. Why did the voice actor suddenly become Welsh? They specifically kept Patches the same voice actor. Yes, that does seem weird, and it could disprove the idea that the two characters are the same. I just think there's too much pointing to them being the same. If you choose to believe they are the same, I would propose a few possibilities. Being a peddler, she picked up on the accent throughout the ages dealing with people from different lands. The voice actor didn't sign up for the DLC. Quite odd, but it happens. Or, as it came to me afterwards, doesn't she sound like Father Oriandel? Or is it just me? Are they implying a connection? Jonas Kiff asks about my statement that the city seen next to Anor Londo at the end of the DLC is actually Londor. Well, the ruins in the drag heap seem to actually be Lothric, so Lothric couldn't be featured at Filianor's Rest. Hollow's ashes found in untainted graves links Londor to Lothric, and its founders would very much likely take architectural inspiration from their former homeland. Creating a whole new architectural style from the ground up would take a lot of time, a lot of trouble, and a lot of talent. Seen from a distance, Londor's silhouette would resemble Lothric's. And there's also the opening cinematic. The narrator says, yes, indeed, it's called Lothric, with ruins at the front, this being Lothric and the other city in the background. Then she continues to say that, in venturing north, they discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades and the lords go without thrones. And here she would be referring to the end of the Pygmy Lords. I suppose most people agree that Filianor's Rest is in the future, but some don't, citing that city as being Lothric, as an argument against it being the future since Lothric was in ruins. So, if you believe Filianor's Rest to be in the future, then this is your counterpoint to that argument. Enjoy. James Blunt proposes that most of the clerics we meet in Dark Souls 1 are from Thorelund, the home of the Way of White. Oswald is the only current cleric we meet. Yes, I've heard that assertion before, but the problem is that Thorelund is never presented as a nation, it's a household, as seen in Petrus's dialogue. Rhea is the youngest daughter of the good house of Thorelund. I didn't feel the need to address this in the video, seeing that this dialogue is a bit hard to miss in-game, but maybe I should have. I've seen it in a wiki as well, I don't remember which one, and regarding that, just try to remember that the people who make the wiki are just people. If it's not a direct quote, then it's not set in stone, and even quotes should be double-checked for good measure. Kenshiro Punch poses two questions. Would the Nameless King have robbed Rosaria's tongue to keep her quiet about Gwendolyn's true heritage, and if Shira is a crossbreed, then who would be her mother or surrogate mother? Both very good questions to which, unfortunately, I had no definitive answers. To the first one I say, maybe. Yes, it could have crossed his mind, and to the second I say simply that I don't know. I suspect she may have a human heritage as well, and that broadens the range of possibilities quite a lot. I haven't found any viable candidates to the role, and maybe she wasn't included in the lore, but I'd like to think I'm just missing something. If anybody has any clues about it, then please do share them with me. I'll gladly listen. What do you know? Patrick again. Thanks for the interest, man. He talks about my proposition that Gale would have been the only family the painter had ever known, and asks my opinion about the line where she references her mother, saying that it sounds like they actually knew each other. To answer this, first I made a comparison. Maybe you, or somebody you know, had a parent serving abroad. Many of us have seen this, I guess. Children talking about this parent as if they had always been there. This sense of intimacy grows from how the parent is presented to the child by those who are actually present. And then I asked him to weigh the two options. Either the painter never knew her mother and the feeling of intimacy comes from how Gale has presented her to the painter during a lifetime. Remember that Gale is a slave knight. He'd be completely deferential to his mistress and would never try to replace her role in the life of her daughter. Or Velka and the painter really have met, but then you'd have to explain why she wasn't named. Colton Williams had a whole bunch of questions. He started with a rapid fire that was answered likewise, so I'll just read the exchange. So the egg Filinorris holding hatched Yorshka while she slept? Yes. What process led to Rosaria being in her current state? She fled Lothric when shit was about to hit the fan, most likely. Why the falling out with Gwyn? She was working with the serpents. It said the queen had a similar falling out with Osiris over his crossbreed obsession, likely resulting in Ocelot, to whatever end. Any ideas on Ocelot? Ocelot is a dead end from a lore hunting perspective. He is the result of Osiris's experiments and the pattern established by Rosaria Fina. Also, the firstborn has a dark purple gem at the base of his spear sword. Could this be a very subtle tie to his mother, Velka? Haven't noticed that gem. I'll check it out, and I think Fina Rosaria is his mother, not Velka. Or is it your belief Velka is not Gwyn's wife or mistress at all? I see no reason to believe that Velka had a relationship to Gwyn, no. I watched a previous video that explained how Gwyndolin was born of Sif's crossbreed experiments and was perhaps the first attempt by Gwyn to create an undying being that could be ideal kindling to link the flame forever and preserve his age. These experiments are likely why he was given the secluded Duke's archives at all, to find a way to keep the age going. I think it's more likely that Sif's experiments aimed at creating a breed of gods that could sustain itself without the first flame, like the dragons. If the idea was to create kindling, then Gwyn would have thrown Gwyndolin in the pyre. How does Lothric enter into this grooming process in royal tradition? The goal of relinking the first flame was propagated by Anor Londo throughout the ages, and considering that Lothric's royal family is likely kin to the gods, that would have been in their best interest. Plus, they already had a previous tradition of worshipping the warriors of sunlight, and Osiris became obsessed with elevating his bloodline. Furthermore, where is Londor at all? We don't know where Londor is located at either in the present times or at the time in which we kindle usurp the flame, but, like I said in the video, we got to see it at the end times. He had 3 more questions after that. How does Shiro fit in with being a daughter of the Duke? Shiro is hinted to be associated with Sif by both her dialogue and the pearl from a man-eater shell on her crown. From there, we could arrive at a crossbreed conclusion by process of elimination. Which is more likely, that a scaleless dragon had sex with a god and they birthed a human-sized girl, or that said dragon, which is already known for its experiments, had one more experiment to mix humans and gods, an experiment so atrocious to the eyes of the gods, that she was exiled to the one place where no one could find her. And having this human heritage, that prison was the one place she'd fit right in, watching over the first men and pygmies. I was dismissive of her at first, but it does make sense. Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough evidence to present it as a solid theory. I wish I had a more clear understanding of Velka and the serpents in all of this. The occult rebellion seems to really just be an uprising of humans using tools she bequeathed. The occult rebellion was in practice just an uprising of humans using tools that were bequeathed. But the people actually running the show had deeper reasons for backing them up, other than just down with their heads. Velka, as shown in the video, wished to undo the wrongdoings of her kin towards men, with the added personal stakes of protecting her unborn daughter from their persecution. The Serpents. Have you watched Primordial Flame? There is one point I make there that is so simple and so important, I wish more people would notice that. At the Dark Lord ending from Dark Souls 1, it is shown that Frampt and Kaf were actually working together, and the usurper ending Dark Souls 3 explains why. They needed to find the true Dark Lord, the one who could harness the power of the first flame. So until that happened, they had to keep the cycle of linking and fading going. There can be no Dark Lord without a flame to be usurped, and they did it by manipulating everyone, pitting them against each other. Odd that Havel would seemingly be in league with her. Regarding Havel, I think that the key to figuring out his lore would be understanding his hatred for both Sith and sorcery. I think that's the missing link and I haven't found it yet. And then he had just one more. Rosaria gives us the miracle of Guinevere. How does this not end the Fina theory? This particular miracle was never given by Guinevere herself. We got it in Dark Souls 1 from a Piasca and in Dark Souls 2 as a Covenant reward, or bought from a vendor. So that in itself wouldn't be enough to say that Rosaria is Guinevere. The problem people point out would be the fact that in Dark Souls 3 it is transposed from her soul, and to that I offered the Stray Demon comparison. You can transpose Havel's ring from his soul, yet nobody believes Havel became a demon. You get this ring from his soul because of his deep link to it, same as Rosaria and Guinevere. Notice that this isn't really an argument for Rosaria not being Guinevere, it just explains one question that arises from my theory. Man, that was a lot. Thanks, Colton. And lastly, there was one particularly patient viewer, DZVW, who disagreed with this theory of Rosaria being the Queen of Lothric and Queen's ex-wife. We exchanged a very long series of questions and rebuttals, and I'd like to take this opportunity to transition into the process of lore hunting itself. There are a few concepts that are just a matter of common sense and will be mentioned just for the sake of being thorough. Be meticulous. You may find yourself awestruck by some revelation and feel the urgent need to share that with the world, but before you do that, put your theory to the test. Do the research, gather evidence, gather your thoughts, and then present it as best as you can. Be careful with your references. Cut content should be taken with a grain of salt, and concept art should be taken with 20. Real-world references and references to other works, while interesting and useful for giving context, shouldn't be used to determine whether something is canon or not. And this is not required, but check the Japanese descriptions, if you can. Be creative. Due to the murky nature of Dark Souls lore and to the conscious efforts by Fromsoftware to make lore hunting a true test of resolve, not every link will be explicitly stated in-game. Sometimes the links will arise through logic alone, sometimes, if you can prove the unequivocal truth about one point, the most logical consequence will be hard to deny without solid evidence. Be grounded. Leaps of logic alone won't suffice. Evidence will be requested and it should be provided beforehand. Maybe you can see or feel the logic that drives your theory, but other people probably won't. Use evidence to link the many points you are making, and in the event that you simply don't have any evidence, make it clear that what you are presenting is pure speculation. There's a chance people will be more forgiving of the lack of hard evidence, and it provides the context necessary to better appreciate your thoughts. Be unbiased. I know you love your theory, but you know what they say. If you love something, you have to tear it apart and see if it breaks under pressure. Be open-minded. Lore hunting doesn't end when you present your theory. It arguably ends when nobody has anything left to say about it, until inevitably somebody finds something to say about it. And I know this may sound a little backwards, but One thing that helped me a lot was realizing that the most important aspect of lore hunting isn't the answers, it's the questions. You can't find the answers if you don't know what the questions are. If you happen to find some interesting detail about the lore, that is probably the answer to a bigger question. And if you can figure out that question, you can start looking for the missing links that will help validate your point. Or maybe that is a simple answer to a simple question, but that simple question is part of a bigger problem, an even bigger question, and now you're onto something. If you've been paying attention to my videos, then you may have noticed that for every few statements made, there are also at least a couple of questions being presented. My first real question about the lore of Dark Souls 3 was probably, why is Gundyr the judge? The game told me he was the judge. There was no question about that, but why him? Later, when I met with Champion Gundyr, the game had told me that he was a champion and that he became a judge. But the question still remained, why is Gundyr the judge? In the process of answering this one, I found many others and the whole thing is far from over. Every question answered beseeches a new one. With enough of them answered, you have uncovered an entire portion of the painting and completely new revelations will come to light. With enough questions answered, disjointed theories begin to weave a single, unified concept that spreads to cover the entirety of the game. My painting isn't yet complete, but when it's done, I hope it will be a somewhat gentler world. Going back to DZVW, I'll use my exchanges with him to illustrate a rule of thumb that I have regarding lore hunting, which is to ask myself, does this theory answer more questions than it creates? Find as many questions as you can on both sides of the equation, and if you end up with a negative sum, you feel it in your guts that you're probably in the wrong track. This cannot and should not be used to either validate or disprove any given theory, but it is a good measure as to how likely you are to be correct about it. So, I believe that Rosaria was the Queen of Lothric and Gwyn's ex-wife. He believes that Guinevere was the Queen of Lothric and Rosaria was Gertrude, which is actually a very popular stance. Well, Rosaria being the Queen of Lothric answers the following questions. Why does the Queen leave cracked red eye orbs for the unkindled, seeing that burial gifts are left by the Queen? Why does the Queen have a hidden blessing, and why is it related to items which, according to their descriptions, would thaw a bonfire's flame? Why did the Cathedral Knights come from Lothric to the Cathedral of the Deep? Why is there a mangrove in the rafters beneath Gertrude's cage? Whatever happened to the Queen of Lothric after all? Rosaria being Queen's former spouse answers these ones. Why can we transpose bountiful sunlight from her soul? Why did her firstborn take her tongue? Why are her blessings present in the Ringed City? Whatever happened to Queen's wife? And, in my opinion, even why the Nameless King was exiled? See, you'd have to ask yourself, why would he side with the dragons in the first place? If I'm correct about my theories regarding Frampt and Kaf, and I honestly think there's no room for error on this one, and the gods themselves had been used as tools against the ancient dragons, then this realization would mean not only that the dragons don't have to be his enemies anymore, but also the enemy of my enemy, you know? And his soul's description says that he sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons, implying that there was an exchange, that he lost everything in order to ally himself with them. But they use sute in its Japanese version, which means to throw away or to abandon, usually in a very casual way, as in throw away the trash, rather than gisei, which means sacrifice. The English description sounds like causation, while the Japanese one sounds more like correlation. He was on a mission. He had to find a way to fight the serpents, but he heard of his father's defeat, and one day he just let go. I actually expanded upon this on the Last Man Standing video, presenting even more arguments to support it. Second, if Rosaria wasn't his mother and Dragon Body was the reason for his exilement, you'd still have to answer the questions I listed above. And lastly, there are his crumbled statues. Archdragon Peak is here now, but now is a long time after the events of Dark Souls 1, and even longer than his actual exilement. The game itself says that a Dragon's Age followed, so in order to side with them, he would have to have done it while they were still fighting each other, or long after Dark Souls 1. If it were while they were still fighting them, then they wouldn't have built his statues in the first place. So it must have been after Dark Souls 1, which would mean that this cannot be the reason why he was exiled. If you take a different stance, then first you'd have to answer the questions above, and then, if you believe Guinevere is the queen, you're also creating the following questions. Why did Guinevere leave her family? Why would she marry Osiris? She'd be Guinevere, goddess of bountiful booty and sunlight. How come people didn't recognize her? What happened to her afterwards? And if you believe that Rosaria is Gertrude, then who's dead in Gertrude's cage? Why aren't the winged knights at the Cathedral of the Deep? Who was her firstborn? Why aren't the fingers collecting eyes? Why would she have an invading covenant? Why would she go to a cathedral where repulsive creatures of the deep slumber? Who's in the cage? Also, I have presented a new theory that she was known as Fina back in Dark Souls 1 in the Non-Warrior Nox video. So if you disagree that Rosaria is Gwyn's ex, you'd also have to address that last theory as well. Yeah, I was going to talk about the Dragon Slayer set from Archdragon Peak to further illustrate this point, but I think I've talked long enough as it is. If you guys want me to run my Dragon Slayer set theory through this exercise, let me know and I'll do it in a future video. And if you want to see all the arguments from my exchanges with DZVW, you can check them out in the comments of Primordial Flame and Lorddom 3. Thank you very much, DZVW, for taking the time and for being passionate about the game. I think this video has run its course. Before I leave, I'd like to mention that I'll be making a short tutorial about how I prepare the scenes for my videos, and I'll be posting it in my Patreon. Thank you for all the people who have left me comments. I love reading through them and talking to you guys. Thank you very much for the 500 subs and all the compliments I have received. They feel really great. Thank you very much for my single Patreon. Yes, I'm talking to you. Thanks, man. Honorable mentions for Bimserbums, Rusty Blade, Chuck Zierli, and Senor Hector Salamanca himself. See ya.